Hi, I'm Jacob Heilbrunn, the editor of The National Interest, and my guest today is Tedo Japaridze, who is here from Georgia. He has a long and illustrious career there as a politician. I would like to ask you as a first question, there's a lot of pressure coming from some of Georgia's erstwhile champions and friends, such as Senator John McCain, who are complaining about Georgia's treatment of Mikhail Saakashvili. Can you tell me what is your stance on this, and how does it feel to be pressured by U.S. senators on this topic?
First of all, I really appreciate being with you, Jacob. It's very important for me to be here at the National Interest and talk to you about Georgia, perspectives, challenges, risks. And Georgia is a small country in a very, I would say, troubled part of the world, and we really appreciate, the assistance we received from the United States of America and from some concrete, public, figures like Senator McCain, and not only him. And we always used to say, and still keep saying, that if Georgia survived as a state, as a country, it's thanks to America's assistance. Again, we are a country in progress. I call Georgia a country, a piece of work in progress. We are not an ideal, country in the world. We are not a beacon of democracy, as President Bush once admitted, talking about Georgia. We're committed to becoming a better place. We are committed to be as much as possible, democratic. We call it, to become institutionalized democracy in this part of the world. And of course, we appreciate any kind of, let's say, advice, including, criticism, if it is, just objective, unbiased. And if it is not only about perceptions, because we need also to take into account perceptions, which sometimes are reality and sometimes just stay perceptions as they are. And Senator McCain has played incredible role since Georgia's independence. He was champion of Georgia, as you admitted. He was really one of the greatest supporters of Georgia's independence and this and that. And now he again, whatever we hear from him, it's not only about specifically about supporting Saakashvili. He tries to convey to us the message that it's not only he's one of the best friends, President Saakashvili, but it's about Georgia. And this message we receive, from time to time is about how to make Georgia a better place, how to make, Georgia a place where, rule of law, governs, where, institutions, function, and where democracy is, going ahead. So we accept, these messages from Senator, McCain, but at the same time, and we're really good friends. I know Senator McCain almost more than 15 years, and there is some certain irony for me because it was me when I was ambassador here in Washington D.C. who introduced President Saakashvili to Senator McCain. I took by that time young President young MP Mikhail Saakashvili and introduced him to Senator McCain. So my message would be, we appreciate your criticism, we appreciate any message from your senator. But at the same time, please look at these, problems through Georgian, lenses. It's not only President Saakashvili or your friendship, with him. It's very personal, but keep in mind that we're committed. We are just committed to democracy. We're committed to our, Euro-Atlantic European orientation, and this kind of, messages which are sometimes too much personalized. It disorients citizens of Georgia, those who are really very much appreciate Senator McCain and his contribution to make Georgia a normal democratic country.
Let's flash back to August 2008 for a moment, since we're talking about Saakashvili. What do you think his legacy is for Georgia? Do you think that he blundered in 2008 when do you believe that he triggered the war with Russia, or that he fell into a trap, or what is your assessment of his legacy?
Let's start with I think very important point. It's long history of our relationship with Russia, and it's a long dream of the Russian leadership. We can start even from the 18th century, that it was idea to control Caucasus from both sides, to have the shortest access to the Black Sea shore. So the ambitions and strategic interests of Russia were quite clear cut a long time ago. Again, in 2008, I would say that we jumped into the trap laid by Russia centuries ago. We could have avoided jumping into this trap, not to make certain mistakes here and there, and that's what we did just before Saakashvili came to power. That was done by President Shevardnadze before Saakashvili became president. That's when you live with big neighbor, and very specific one. You need to calculate well each step you're going to make on a daily basis, and not to give any excuse. And it's very unfortunate for me to say, but that's the reality, because we're talking not only about neighborhood, but we are talking about the geography, which we unfortunately cannot change. So we should be very careful. We should be wisely formulating our foreign policy trajectories and interests, but at the same time, again, being careful does not mean that we should surrender our national strategic interests to whoever, in this case Russia. But unfortunately, Russians had this excuse. Russians started this invasion, but at the same time they had this very specific excuse, because technically, if we speak about that, the first shot was made by President Saakashvili, and who initiated, who provoked that, there is no doubt for me, but at the same time, we jumped, as I said, in this trap, and unfortunately, the outcome is quite well known. We lost 20% of Georgian territories. Georgia is now a dismembered country, and here we are. We have absolutely different political landscape in the Caucasus.
In talking about the history of Georgia, however, it isn't the case that Georgia has just been the subject of Russian power. It was a Georgian who played the greatest role in constructing the Russian colossus in the 20th century.
Yeah, I would say that I heard this, message many times from my friends in Russia, in America, in Europe, of course. Joseph Joashvili was born to Georgia. He was born in Gori,
right,
which is geographically part of Georgia, and it's one of the central parts of Georgia. But as Stalin, I think Stalin belongs to all of us, to all. It's property and legacy of the Soviet Union. It's not only Georgia or Georgians who should, let's say, but Stalin is property of all those people, leaders, ordinary citizens who used to live in a country which now disappeared, which used to be Soviet Union, USSR. He was kind of dictator who created this huge empire, as you said, colossus. And I would say you go to Moscow, you go to Russia, and people still are nostalgic, for Stalin. And some people, some leaders in Russia even are just, saying that this was, very tragic development, collapse of the Soviet Union. So Stalin belongs to all of us. It's not only...
Let's talk about one of those people, which is Russian President Vladimir Putin, recently defended the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact of 1939, which carved up Poland and the Baltic states. Is Stalin a model for Putin?
I don't know. I never talked to President Putin about, Stalin. I met, by the way, President Putin a couple of times in different, formats, in different, I would say, company. I used to be a national security advisor once. In this capacity, we had, meetings of national security advisors of the Caucasian, states. And I had, this opportunity to meet Putin, but we talked not about Stalin, not about the USSR, but we talked about very concrete, very specific, sensitive issues Georgians experience and have. These are, conflicts on the Georgian territory. These were just issues of Abkhazia and Ossetia. But again, reading, watching, naturally, I read whenever Putin makes, statements, or just writes articles or whatever. And I wouldn't say that way that he tries to replicate, Stalin, and Stalin is his role model. At least, he never said this, publicly, and I do not know what he says whenever he looks into the mirror and who looks back at him, maybe Joseph Stalin, maybe somebody else, maybe Putin himself. But whatever is going on now in Russia and what Russian leadership and personally Putin, if we go back to this, his, notorious, I would say, statement at the Valdai Club, of course it's not about, Stalin's imperia. It's about, regional Russian interests, about which, Russians identify as legitimate. And its attempt to keep all of us former Soviet, republics and currently independent sovereign states in the Russian, loop. So will it be beneficial for Russia itself? I have big doubts about that, because in my opinion, Jacob, Russia would benefit or could have benefited, much more had Russia had around itself, very peaceful, stable, as much as possible democratic, neighborhood, which I think could have been in the interest of Russia's, prosperity, stability, and in this regard, of course, everybody needs, Russia stable and secure and not unstable or crumbling empire or whatever.
Speaking of stability, there seems to be some upheaval in Georgia itself in your current coalition government. Do you want to talk about the current state of affairs?
Absolutely. So I do not identify that as some crisis. I would say that this is kind of, as I said, Georgia is a piece of work in progress, including democracy building, and I would say that this is just things like that happen in each democratic state. Things like that may happen in France, in Europe, in Italy, in Spain. Of course, we're Georgians, and whenever things happen, it looks like a bit more vibrant than usually are supposed to be. So again, we had coalition of Georgian Dream. Now we have we by the way, we kept this majority within the coalition. Now Irakli Alasani, a former Minister of Defense, he has his own group. He's out of this coalition, but I think, of course, we can look at this development, as saying, goes that, whether this bottle of Georgian democracy is, half full or half empty. I would say that it's, half full, and this would make whatever happened. Of course, I cannot say that I'm the happiest person the way it happened, because Irakli Alasani is a very close friend of mine. I trust that he's decent and high level, professional, but things like that, happen. When there is, there are some questions, these questions and this case should be investigated. Let this due process, go to the end, then we'll find out. If we speak about coalition, then I think, it would be better for Georgian democracy to have, coalition here, to have, UNM, which is President Saakashvilis, party which is in the parliament, and it's very good to have a new pole, the third, group of politicians, which will be also, debating, opposing whatever coalition would be, just suggesting to the citizens of Georgia. I think if we look in this, into the perspective, in the end, and if you ask me personally, of course, it has been done a bit in an ugly way, awkward way, as we usually do, because we are Georgians, and we're learning a lot of things, how to make it, how to make democracy function appropriate way. But in the end, I would interpret that it's good for Georgia's democracy, and it's, I would say, should be interpreted that way.
Do you think Mr. Saakashvili is on the road to a comeback in Georgia?
He can come back, to Georgia anytime as a private citizen, but I doubt, I doubt that he would come ever as politician or even more, as kind of next president of Georgia. But he has to come to Georgia. It's his own country. He has, certain, questions to answer, because it's not only about prosecutor's office, but citizens of Georgia want to hear from him regarding different quite not that pleasant issues. So, but again, he can come anytime to Georgia. It's his country, and he's always welcome to come. But if he comes, he needs to just be absolutely confident that he would be he has to answer certain questions from the law enforcement agencies.
Do you think Georgia should become a member of NATO? Do you have a practical path forward for achieving that?
That's quite interesting, question. Of course, we would love, to become members of NATO or the European Union, but at the same time, and that's the difference between us and them and the previous regime, that we understand that it's a long term process. It takes time. It takes, again, when we speak about NATO membership, for example, it's not only about Georgia's military capacity, but it's about Georgia's institutional building. It's about quality of Georgian democracy, quality of rule of law. So it would take time. But meanwhile, Georgia, as you know, is one of the non-NATO member state which has contributed to the security on a global level in a very big way. We have our military men and women in uniform, in very troubled parts of the world. Afghanistan, we used to be in Iraq, and we have progressed in this regard. And I need to say, talking about former Minister of Defense Al-Hassania, that his role and his contribution to make Georgian defense ministry and Georgian army on a very bringing them on a very high NATO standards is absolutely essential. But it's again, it's it would be a long-term process. And speaking about NATO, it's not about Georgian obsession that we would love to become members of NATO, because we do not have another alternative. Is there any alternative for Georgia but NATO? And we understand also that NATO is not panacea for us. But we understand that Russians are quite irritated, and one of the reasons what happened to us in 2008 was that this Georgia's intentions to join or whatever into NATO. But whenever we speak, I spoke many times to Russian colleagues, and talking about NATO, I said, but we understand your concerns. We do not accept them. We disagree with them because we have absolutely different commitments and different perspectives. But where is Russia's good neighborhood policy, and which Russians always have the same same answer, day in, day out, year in, year out. We do not have good neighborhood policy. So that's the reason for Georgia to look, towards, NATO. And using this opportunity, Jacob, sitting with you, I'd like to pose question to our Russian friends. Why all of us, almost all of us, former Soviet republics, we need to be, specific, countries like Georgia, Moldova, why we run, away from Russians and from Russia? Why we do not want to come back, to Russia? Because we do not have an alternative, and Russians never deliver, to us, any kind of alternative to NATO or just European Union. And the only, pattern they use, is, the so-called, negative conditionality, which is, either with us or with them. And if hypothetically we would tell them, okay, but what's your alternative? We do not have alternative. So that's the reality. It's again realities on the ground, but I'm repeating this point that unfortunately we cannot change our geography, and we have this rough, I would say, neighborhood, which is not only about Russia, but we have Turks, we have Iran, we have Azerbaijan, we have Armenia. And all these elements of this regional configuration are going through very complex transformation. And everything is close by. It takes 1 hour, 15 minutes to reach from Tbilisi, capital of Georgia, places like Baghdad and Kirkuk. So it's like chaos theory. One flop of butterfly in Georgia, or in one flop of butterfly in Baghdad, Kirkuk, or Tehran, may change landscape. So that's why Georgia needs to be wise country, and decisions should be made in a very cautious, well-calculated way.
Well, it hadn't occurred to me that we'd be talking about chaos theory today, but this has been a fascinating discussion. Thank you, Tedo.
Appreciate it.